I love Sonic Heroes. Unlike the last two games, I have played this one quite a bit in the past, and I've even managed to finish it once. That was a while ago, and I remember very little beyond what I played as a child, but I'm definitely going into this one with a lot more knowledge than the last two games. As such, I'm starting with Team Rose because they're the easiest team by far. I understand the logic behind this. If someone who isn't used to playing video games, usually young girls, were to pick up the game for the first time, they'd be attracted to the most unassuming team. Don't get me wrong, it worked. I'd always play as Team Rose when I was really young, both because they were unassuming and because they were the easiest. Also because I always preferred playing as girls in video games. I really should have picked up on the fact that I was trans earlier. Anyway, the game starts off with a cutscene of Amy holding a newspaper clipping with a picture of, seemingly, Sonic carrying Froggy and Chocola, Big's pet frog and Cream's pet Chow respectively. Amy accidentally lets the newspaper blow into the wind, but Cream is able to fly up and grab it, saying Amy needs to be more careful with her only clue. Cream herself then gets blown away by the wind, only for Big to swoop in and lasso her with his fishing rod, which seems dangerous. I guess he doesn't have a hook on it or something? You never see one on there. Cream bounces off Big's umbrella, which makes it seem like she should fly off again, but whatever. They go off looking for Sonic, Chocola, and Froggy, because apparently they've gone missing. Team Rose's first level is a full-on tutorial. At this rate, they really should have put Team Rose on the very left in the team selection screen, instead of between the hard mode and the weird mode, but we have the internet now, and even without it, I figured this out as a tiny clueless child, so I guess it worked well enough. The tutorial level primarily covers the main gimmick of the game, that being the three character types, Speed, Flying, and Power. For Team Rose, the Speed character is Amy, the Flying character is Cream, and the Power character is Big. In retrospect, I regret not pointing out the various Big Easter eggs in Adventure 2, but the past is past. You're first taught that you can switch characters, and that these gates automatically switch characters for you. The Speed character can homing attack, do something called a Rocket Excel, this game's version of the Spin Dash, and fittingly, go fast. The Flying character can, well, fly, and Thunder Shoot, basically just throw their teammates at enemies to stun them. The Power character can kill enemies in fewer hits and break things. The characters can also each level up by either collecting an orb of their respective color or by hitting a checkpoint with them as the leader. Each level will increase their abilities differently, with the Power character doing more damage and adding a spiky fire bobber to the end of Big's fishing rod for his final attack in his combo, the Speed character doing more damage per homing attack, and the Flight character doing damage with a Thunder Shoot. The Flight character is the best by far because of this. They're the best at tight platforming, can kill most enemies with a Thunder Shoot, stunning them if not, and can attack from a distance because of it. Plus they can just kind of fly over most of the power-based obstacles. You can't fly forever. Well, you can, as long as you don't move. Moving horizontally drains your flight gauge, and when that drops to 0, you drop 2. How does Cream carry Big like that with just your ears? Anyway, there's also the Team Blast, which is based on a meter in the top right. It fills by killing enemies, collecting rings, all that, and can be filled instantly with a specific item box. It will instantly kill all normal enemies on screen, do huge damage to bosses and bigger enemies, and give each character a level on top of giving the whole team a temporary boost, Team Rose's being invincibility. The tutorial level does a really good job of showing you what to do and how to play the video game, but also it's very, very patronizing. It's really slow and annoying. Plus, it being forced at the beginning of Team Rose's story is entirely superfluous since you can play it at any time from the main menu. The first actual stage is really, really good. Seaside Hill and Ocean Palace have some of my favorite theming of any Sonic levels. The stone ruins in the middle of the ocean scattered around various islands is incredible. I love the vibe of this game in general, but especially this stage. Honestly, I've played this game so many times that I can beat these levels without really thinking about it. It made it really hard to write a proper retrospective on this stage. I'd say that, but I died at the very first obstacle twice because I just wasn't paying attention. But you know what I mean. After a short platforming section that heavily encourages using the Flight character for platforming because it's easier, but still rewards using the Speed character instead, which is incredible and easily balances out the power difference between the three playstyles, you're immediately given a gimmick. You're thrown onto a cart that you can move horizontally and jump with that constantly moves forward. You literally can't get hurt in this first section, but this cart comes back several times through the game, getting harder each time. If you get hit, you lose one of the three characters, each one contributing to the cart's handling, until all three are gone and you lose a life. I like this because all of them are short, and it uses the cart differently through each use in the game without it overstaying its welcome. You're then given your first choice of obvious split path, either speed or flight oriented, each with its own pros and cons, namely that the flight one is slower but easier, just like the actual playstyles themselves. You're then given the suggestion to use the Flight character to take out a flying enemy by a sign, which are scattered all over the game suggesting, but not forcing, which character you use. You then have to use the Power character to break a block, revealing a spring that you use to go up to the next area. This is followed by a bunch of enemies, and because you're already likely using the Power character, this flows very nicely. I won't be this meticulous for long, I just want to point out how the moment-to-moment stage design in this game is so much better than either of the other games I've played so far, despite both being considered significantly better in the zeitgeist, at least in my experience. On top of that, because of the game's perspective and smaller focus on speed in the same way as Unleashed, you're less likely to die to things that you don't see coming. The game's focus is speed, but not via reaction, rather via strategy and skill, deciding where you can switch to the speed character and take the faster route, where you should use the flight character to avoid a difficult situation, and where you should use the power character to take out enemies or break an obstacle. Even a lot of the obstacles for the power characters can be flown over or jumped around, taking more time and skill respectively. The act is over shortly after, as Team Rose has the shortest acts of any team by far, since they're the easy mode. Instead of immediately going to the next act though, I'm going to cover each team's differences as I go. Every team has a slightly different enemy, collectible, and obstacle layout, but other than that, most of the stage is the same. What is largely different though is the length or difficulty, well, except Chaotix, but we'll get there. Team Sonic is the normal mode of the game, harder than Rose, easier than Dark. Team Sonic consists of, obviously, Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. Sonic and Shadow are able to use the Lightspeed Dash on Trails of Rings, which is weird since Shadow couldn't do it in Adventure 2, but he also died at the end of that game, so whatever. Every speed character other than Amy can use a triangle jump, essentially just a wall jump. All the flight characters are pretty much exactly the same with one exception that I'll point out later. The power characters all have different attacks, but Big is kind of the outlier. Most of them charge forward with their teammates attached to their attacking implement, since Vector uses his snout for some reason. Knuckles has a jump into a slam that becomes an AoE at higher levels. The Team Blast also lets you use the Lightspeed attack by pressing B in midair next to an enemy, same as Sonic Adventure 1, but without the charge-up time. Team Dark is almost exactly the same, but Omega has an attack where he fires bullets in a circle from his arms. The Team Blast also freezes the timer and all enemies for a moment, being Chaos Control. Team Chaotix is pretty different in general, so I'll cover them in a minute. First, the rest of the act. Team Sonic's opening cutscene shows Sonic running through a canyon, with Tails flying up to him in the Tornado 2 with Knuckles in the back. Tails hands him a paper with a video on it? Whatever, Eggman's a genius, I'm fine with this. Eggman says he's planning on conquering the world in 3 days, so we gotta stop him. The first act continues on past the end of Roses, with a cannon being in place of the gold ring. If you jump into the cannon, you'll be shot in a different direction depending on the formation you're in, with Power being able to freely control the cannon, but being put in a default direction. There's just another cart section, again with no threats, a couple loops, and a couple groups of enemies. That's the only real difference. The second group of enemies has a Team Blast collectible and a balloon right before it, so it's not even a threat. Team Dark's story opens with Rouge breaking into Eggman's base, finding Shadow, and Omega waking up and targeting Shadow, saying destroy all Eggman's robots. It turns out, Shadow doesn't remember anything, and Omega is mad at Eggman for locking him in that room. Anyway, the act ends in the same spot, but has a slightly different path there. Plus the enemies and even some platforms are laid out to make it slightly more difficult. This will be a running theme. As you level up the speed character, the other characters will start homing attacking enemies with you, usually so you only have to attack once for them to die, but sometimes they'll get to the enemy first. This usually only happens if you're frequently slowing down or turning around, so it's not a large issue, but you can die from this as I did in this stage. Team Chaotix is pretty different from the other teams. It starts with Charmy barging in on Vector listening to music in his detective office, dropping a package in the process. Espio throws a kunai to catch it, and they open it, revealing a walkie-talkie. They're all excited about finally having work to pay the rent. I gotta say, that's pretty relatable. Aside from that though, they're also still pretty different. Instead of only getting to the end of a stage, their goal is to complete missions in acts. The first act's mission is collecting 10 hermit crabs to test their abilities, I guess. They're scattered throughout the act on ledges, pillars, and boxes and blocks, so you actually have to explore the stage instead of just burning through it. Charmy is the only flight character with a special ability. He can make these metal flowers bloom with a thunder shot and use them to teleport. Espio can turn invisible by using his tornado move and can throw ninja stars by tapping the B button, which has the added fun of accidentally using the rocket excel when you just want to throw a star, so it's pretty useless. Vector isn't that different in terms of moves, honestly. Oh yeah, the tornado move. It's only used to get rid of enemy shields and a little platforming later. Every speed character can use it by jumping and pressing B in midair. Amy's moves forward independent of her while the others stay in place where they used it. Well, B on GameCube. I've never played the Xbox or PS2 versions. But apparently they're way glitchier. Team Chaotix seems glitchier than the other teams too, considering that Espio went flying off this loop every single time I tried to use it. Their Team Blast gives them rings for every enemy they kill while the ability lasts. If you manage to get a hidden key and make it to the end of the stage without getting hit, much like the Chao keys in Adventure 2, you get into the special stage. The special stage is at the end of Act 1 of each stage, so you getting as many orbs as you can to increase your time limit and make it to the end in order to get as many extra lives as possible. During the special stages at the end of each Act 2, you have to go quickly enough to catch up to the Chaos Emerald. Each stage has one emerald shared between all 4 teams, so you don't need to collect all emeralds for every team, thankfully, especially since you need all 7 for the final story. As such, though, it's easiest to get the emeralds as Team Rose, so that's likely what I'll be doing. Shortly into the second act, you're told that the power characters can fly using the giant fans on the ground. Big with his umbrella, Knuckles because he's Knuckles, Omega because boosters, I think, and Vector with bubblegum. After a few loops and jumps, you're put on the backs of giant swimming turtles with platforms on them. The platforms containing Eggman's robots, not badniks in this game for some reason, and cannons. After a couple cannon shots, spring jumps, and ramps, you're at the end of the stage. Team Sonic's act continues on after the turtles with a few more split paths, obstacles, and, most notably, running away from a giant spiky stone wheel with a face painted onto it. This is really fun. I actually really like this section. It's not too unique or difficult, especially after City Escape, but it is a nice memorable capstone after both acts have already heavily established a gameplay loop, instead of being a very prominent section at the end of the very first stage, so it's not quite as bad. Pretty much the exact same thing I said for the last act for Team Dark applies here too. It's harder. I got a B for both acts for Team Dark, so I assume the point thresholds are also higher. There are a lot more enemies though, so it makes sense. Team Chaotic stage is actually just getting to the end. There's a Chao in a cage for some reason, and freeing it ends the stage. It's between the end of Team Rose's and the other team's endings, and you have to teleport using one of the flowers instead of just running down a corridor, but otherwise it's pretty similar. The final act of every stage is a boss. The first few bosses are largely the same for every team. I don't even think it's any more difficult for Team Dark. There are 3 kinds of bosses in this game, the first one being a chase boss, the Egg Hawk. You're chasing Eggman around a loop while he fires attacks at you. For this first boss, he'll eventually stop and start spinning, firing bullets in a circle. This is a great opportunity to attack him, especially with the power character's aerial attack, since the bullets are all close to the ground and being in the air lets you aim directly for the main weak spot, the head. There are several parts of the Egg Hawk you can break off, such as the turrets, the wings, and the body, but breaking the body or the head will win the boss fight, and the head has much less health. It's a super simple boss, just attack him a few times and you win easily, but the A-rank time is 1 minute, and I got literally less than a second over a minute in my Team Rose playthrough, which is my first B rank. I'm very glad I'm not going for all A ranks. That said, I did A rank this boss with Team Sonic and Team Dark. The next stage is Grand Metropolis. Team Rose is here because Amy's heart is sure Sonic is here. I mean, she's right, but that seems odd, no? She's into tarot cards and stuff, so does that mean tarot cards and things of that nature actually work in the Sonic universe? The stage introduces a few things, namely combat gates, where you need to destroy all of the Eggman's robots. Yes, that's what they're actually called in this game.
Look at all those Eggman robots!
A new Eggman's robot that looks like a turtle, poles that you can use the tornado to climb up, switches you have to push, and rail grinding. The stage also has a couple gimmicks, namely energy paths that move you along them, or even just straight up. The combat gates give more utility to the power character, as they can kill Eggman's robots faster than the flight characters, even though the flight characters are definitely overpowered. Their main drawback is speed, which is the point of these games, right? So it's really a big risk-reward system that permeates the whole game. The turtle enemies are weird. The green ones can just be hit by a power character, but there are yellow ones, and you aren't playing as Team Rose, that you have to flip over with the tornado, and then are vulnerable. The act itself starts off with running down a self-moving path made of energy. I don't know exactly how these work physics-wise anyway, but it's cool, so I don't mind. After a jump, you're immediately shown a turtle robot with power signs next to it, which is a good introduction. The first switch you see opens a door next to a combat gate with the enemy for that combat gate inside the door, so it kills 2 birds with 1 stone. The biggest problem with the switches is they use the same button as the Rocket Excel, Attacking, and Thundershoot, so no matter which character you're using, it can be interrupted by being in slightly the wrong spot, but just, pay attention and it's not that bad. Immediately afterward, there's a completely optional switch that only gives you a Team Blast, showing that while speed is important, exploration is also useful. All but one of the switches are entirely optional to Team Sonic, but that makes sense considering Team Rose is clearly supposed to be the first team you play as. The game continues to reward skill with a homing attack chain leading into rings, because we're still early in the game, and then brings in more spectacle by launching us through a window. There's no shattering animation or anything, but it's a big jump, so it's still cool. Speaking of, I love the music and aesthetic of this stage, and I have no idea why. I've always loved city aesthetics, but the music just scratches a brain itch. You're then shown the poles, and after a short segment with some enemies, you're shot out of a cannon directly onto rails. They're really getting all the mechanic introductions out of the way. This is a good thing, I think. It means that they can focus purely on level design and stage-specific gimmicks later. Team Rose's stage ends right after the rail grinding, but of course the others continue. Team Sonic is able to make it through this stage much quicker with light speed dashes and less switch pushing, but the stage is a little longer. I also learned that, while at level 3, homing attacks will trigger the tornado, so you can immediately go up to poles, flip over turtles, and remove shields. The area after Team Rose's ending is just a short running section with the opportunity to learn a bit, namely a light speed dash and some enemies. Team Dark stage is kind of a mix between Rose and Sonic. There are a lot more switches you have to hit because there will be enemies behind doors that they open, but there are also a lot of enemies out in the open. There are enemies blocking light speed dash rings and blocking the poles. It's overall just harder. There are even a lot of gates that automatically switch your formation, but instead of being helpful like the Team Rose ones, they tend to force you to react to a faster path. The Chaotix version of this level is pretty much just the Team Rose version, but you have to kill every single one of Eggman's robots in the entire level. It sounds slow and tedious, but because of how the combat works in this game, it's actually pretty fun, and I had a pretty good time doing it. Act 2 starts off with an elevator ride, which is always exciting. This is the first thing I'd say is outright bad in this game, but at least there are collectibles along it, and there are only a few of them throughout the whole game. Each team also has different enemies along the elevators. There's also the first instance of a path being faster for a flight character here, as it skips all the looping, so it's not just speed is faster. Sometimes you have to react and use the formation you wouldn't expect. There are balls of plasma along the next path, so this time the faster speed is actually a negative. It's pretty easy to weave through them, but it gets harder as time goes on. We're introduced to some minor precision platforming, both with the launch rings and actually landing on platforms here, where flight characters really shine, but a lot of the tighter platforming later on can still be done by speed characters. There's also targets that you have to hit with the flight character's Thunder Shoot, which I completely forgot showed up this early, and the stage ends for Team Rose shortly after. For Team Sonic, it just feels like the stage repeats, honestly. There's another elevator, this time with some enemies, some more self-moving paths, more energy fields that move the characters upward, flying enemies you have to take out with the flight formation. Nothing new is introduced here. It even has another section like the precision platforming, and another elevator afterward with plasma balls. There is a section where you have to climb quickly enough that the energy doesn't rise and melt you in it, so that's new at least. Team Dark Stage is similar to Sonic's with the same normal changes, more enemies and such, but also with the added bonus that you can entirely skip the elevators if you hit the boost rings. It's incredible, it makes the stage so much more fun. The biggest problem is that Chaos Control pauses the moving platforms completely, so if you use it just before one, you have to wait for it to run out before moving on. The final section with the rising energy is also a lot harder with the added enemies because of the combat gate near the top, but it's not that bad. The Team Chaotix version of this level is strange. You need to take out 3 of the yellow turtles. It's easy enough, you just run through the stage until you find one, destroy it, and move on. Most of them are in cages that you have to press a switch to open, but you can also take them out through the cage with a Team Blast, so I was able to finish the stage a little faster than I otherwise would have with that. The boss fight here is a team fight, where you fight another team, and these are all exactly the same. Team Sonic and Rose fight each other because Amy wants to force Sonic into marrying her, but actually they think that Sonic kidnapped Chocola and Froggy, which they should know didn't happen, but whatever. Team Dark and Chaotix fight because Rouge thought Chaotix was suspicious, Vector calls Rouge a broad, which is so out of pocket.
What do you think you're doing here?
Who's this broad?
And then they fight, which is totally warranted. All of the character battles can be pretty easily won by just spamming Thunder Shoot and the Tornado move. The Thunder Shoot will stun the enemy and the Tornado sends the characters flying off of the edge. There are level up item boxes and even a Team Blast you can grab, but they're completely unnecessary. I should probably mention here that the characters all constantly make quips. I love it, it's great. Don't get me wrong, it can be pretty annoying, but it adds so much character to the game. Tails will constantly yell about being dizzy or that he's falling, Omega always talks about annihilating Eggman's robots, Big is talking about Froggy, and Team Chaotix is always complaining about Ren. What I don't like, though, is the sound effects that play every time you do an action, like attacking with a power character or flying upward with a flight character. Hearing Knuckles say shit over and over is not my ideal way to play a video game.
Shit! Shit! Yeah! Shit!
Don't even get me started on how annoying Omega is. The next stage, Casino Park and Bingo Highway, are largely hated in my experience, and I genuinely don't understand why. I found them pretty fun personally. For the 3 normal teams, the goal is to get to the end of the stage, but if you want a good score, you need a lot of rings. You can get rings by hitting the slot machines as you go along the pinball tables. This makes me think of Sonic Spinball, and I am both dreading and extremely excited for that game. Anyway, I think a lot of people don't like the pinball table gimmick, since it can be hard to control, but it's pretty easy to learn through the course of the level. Your ability to move left and right depends on which direction you were hit by an obstacle last. If you hit a bumper that moves you to the left, you won't be able to move to the right very easily, for instance. The game also tends to naturally move you toward where you're supposed to go. Most of the time you just need to get to the top or the bottom of the table, but the ending, for instance, has you land in the middle of the table. There are even a few gimmicks introduced here, such as switches you need to fly to push, or even just be in the flight formation for, since their totem is much taller and lets them be at the height of the switch. There are also Eggman's robots that will summon other Eggman's robots when they catch you in their spotlight, or ones that will capture a teammate and make them unplayable until the robot is taken out. There are these little gates that flip when a power character hits them, smacking the character into the air, and glass floors that power characters need to break. The pinball obstacles are also used in general platforming, which is really cool. There's a section just after Team Rose's ending that has a staircase covered in lasers that you can't go up, but Knuckles specifically calls out that there's something up there. I have no idea what it's for or why it's there, and I never have. I assume you can get in there with Team Chaotix, but I've never been that far in the stage with them since their mission is, fittingly, to collect rings. I've always just done that at the earliest possible slot machine. This is one of my favorite Chaotix missions though. It's fun and it fits the theme perfectly without feeling completely pointless like the Hermit Crabs. Bingo Highway is pretty similar to Casino Park, but with one major difference. Bingo. As you roll down certain parts of the stage, instead of being on a pinball board, you'll be collecting bingo numbers. The numbers will show up on a giant board, and collecting a bingo will give you rings. The stage really highlights how short Team Rose's stages are, in my opinion. It really feels like you're only playing half a stage here. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, since you play the level 3 more times, but it's very noticeable. The bingos are really fun to collect, but I do want to complain about the boards a little bit. This can happen in Casino Park, but it happened a lot more here for me. If you make it to the end of a board and switch to another character, that character may still be in the middle, or, more likely, at the beginning of the board, so you just have to do it again. Usually they snap straight to you once they're at the end, but sometimes they just don't. You're supposed to be able to switch characters on the board, presumably so you can get bingos easier because the numbers are split up a lot of the time, so it's impossible to get a bingo. But the computers will almost always just go flying off the edge, so it's pretty pointless. Aside from that though, I really like these two acts. The boss here is our third and final boss type, Waves of Enemies. This one is pretty easy, but each team has a different amount of and different kinds of enemies. Team Sonic tends to be pretty easy since you essentially get 2 Team Blasts for the price of 1 because of how powerful the light speed attack is. The invincibility on Team Rose is nice but not super useful, and Chaos Control completely prevents the next wave from spawning at all. The rings from Team Chaotix, however, make this fight a cakewalk. The Team Blast meter is filled by rings, so it's very easy to get a ton of rings from the attack itself, then get enough to refill the meter while the ability is still in effect. The fight is only a few minutes long, but I can definitely see this outstaying its welcome next time. Rail Canyon's main gimmick is, you guessed it, rails. Lots of rail grinding, reacting to upcoming obstacles, getting on the right rail to get a better time, jumping onto and between rails, even switches that change the direction of certain rails. Team Rose's version of the stage is very lacking. There are very few obstacles on the rails, so it's pretty boring. You're basically just pressing the go faster button the whole time. There are a couple instances of trains coming up on the track, but far less so than other teams. Aside from them though, the stage is actually pretty fun, despite seeming like a very repetitive stage for all the rails. I can say that it's definitely better than Final Rush from Adventure 2. The rail grinding mechanics actually work, including rail switching, which is admittedly much better than I remember from the last time I played this game. Changing the direction of the rails is surprisingly more than Spectacle 2, and is quite refreshing after all the pointless gimmicks have unleashed. There are instances where you have to press the switch in time to take an alternate route, or where hitting the switches will actually slow you down, so you have to avoid it instead. They're used for pure spectacle every now and then, but it's much easier to appreciate when it's used as an actually enjoyable mechanic. Chaotix mission for this stage is basically just get to the end, so there's not much difference here. There is one portion where you have to hit 2 switches by specifically going out of your way to get them, otherwise you end up just going in circles, so that's unique, I guess. Bullet Station uses most of the same mechanics, but instead of focusing on the rail switching, or even grinding in general, it tests your attention as well as introducing a new mechanic. A short section after getting shot out of a giant cannon, where you move left and right through the air to collect item balloons. This exact mechanic doesn't come back, but a very similar one does, so keep it in mind. When the stage does use rail grinding, it focuses on different kinds, such as jumping onto and off of rails instead of switching rails on a linear track. There's also, surprisingly enough, a puzzle where you actually have to figure out which direction you need the rail to go, instead of just pressing both the switches, but it's right where Team Rose's stage ends, so they don't get to do it. There's also a couple sections where you run along trains and have to destroy the engine at the front to continue. One of the most interesting things they introduce in the stage is hitting multiple switches at once by leaving a character behind. If a character you aren't controlling hits one of the switches, they stay behind, so you have to figure out which formation works best for that set of switches in order to press all of them. The Chaotix mission starts off where the Team Rose act ends, and then you have to go forward from there destroying the weird capsule things. It's pretty simple, nothing exciting or different here. The boss for this stage is another chase boss, the Egg Albatross. It's exactly the same for all teams, like the Egg Hawk. This one has 3 stages, a propeller thing, a blimp, and the Egg Hawk on top. All 3 phases can be beat by spamming the homing attack, but for the first one you have to make sure you're in the right spot, otherwise you won't actually do any damage. This doesn't work nearly as well as Team Chaotix, and I could not tell you why. For the second phase you don't really need to pay attention to anything, but it is easier and faster if you do get in the right spot. The final phase is the Egg Hawk with less health and it doesn't stop moving. Spamming can work here, but it works a lot better if you actually try and get towards the body to do damage. I don't know if this is how you're supposed to beat this boss, but it works well enough, so I don't really care. At this point, I realized that in the menus they changed the names of acts and zones for some reason. Each area, the seaside area, the city area, the casino area, those are called acts, and the individual levels themselves are called zones. I do not care, I will be referring to them however I want. The next 2 levels are set in a rainforest. I don't know how they got to a rainforest from a dry canyon, but I don't know how they get to any of the areas, so whatever. It's all the same to me. The main gimmick of this stage is frogs. Frogs that make it rain, and the plants grow. I like it, I think it's fun, and they're frogs, which is undeniably a good thing. It can leave it waiting for the frogs to finish their animations for the platforms to show up, but largely that doesn't happen, and if it does you can just use the flight formation to fly over where the platform will be, which is usually pretty obvious. For whatever reason, the loops and rails in this stage specifically are really janky and I have no idea why. I was eventually able to get past it, but it was just kind of frustrating a lot of the time. Other than that though, this stage is really fun. This is also where the similar mechanic to the cannon comes in. Instead of going left and right after getting shot out of a cannon, you move up and down while flailing around on spinning flour. This would be a fun or interesting, or both, mechanic if the flour didn't flail all over the place, making it nearly impossible to actually get the item balloons. Luckily there are no obstacles along the path, so it's not really an issue. The Chaotix mission in this act is just getting through without being seen by any of the frogs. This is cool in concept, but it also undermines the entire gimmick of the stage. That said, it does replace it with a new gimmick, and we've already been through this stage 3 times, plus you actually get to use Espio's invisibility, so I like it. There's actually a flower in this stage that doesn't teleport you just use it as a platform, and as far as I can tell, it's the only one in the game. The next act uses a similar gimmick, but flips it on its head. Instead of the frogs making plants grow, they make plants shrivel. This means the fruit on the plant will fall and may hit you, but it can also hit enemies, taking them out immediately. I really like this inversion, and Team Sonic even has to rescue frogs, which is a great callback to the point in the classics being entirely to rescue the animals trapped in Badniks. This time they're just trapped by Eggman's robots, not in them. The drink for the loops and rails is still here, and because of this is the first level that I didn't get to the special stage on my first try as Team Rose. I didn't get it as Team Dark either because I kept dying on the final obstacle where you're swinging on vines to avoid a crocodile. They're just kind of finicky. You have to jump right at the top of its arc rather than before that to conserve speed, but aside from that the actual timing seems to just randomly change. I died to this like 6 times for my Team Dark playthrough. Team Chaotix is tasked with collecting Chao in the stage, and it's very similar to the first act, collecting the hermit crabs. That said, I'm pretty sure you're only collecting Chao for the next boss, but I digress. I was able to get the Chaos Emerald as Team Chaotix this time, so I didn't have to replay the stage for a 5th time, thankfully. The boss fight here is another character fight. This time it's Sonic vs Dark and Rose vs Chaotix. Sonic is fighting Dark because Shadow or something? I don't know, it seems pointless, but them meeting up does progress the story. I just don't understand why they're fighting. Chaotix and Rose fight because Amy turns down Vector. Oh, also because Chaotix wants cheese, the other Chao that Cream has, because they're collecting Chao, and now Team Rose thinks that Team Chaotix kidnapped Chocolat. Anyway, it's easy enough to spam Thundershoot and Tornadoes until they die. Moving on. Hang Castle's main gimmick is flipping the entire stage upside down with these weird orb switch things. There are also ghost enemies with pumpkin heads. I don't know why they didn't just use the Sonic Adventure 2 ghosts again, but here we are. There are massive swinging axes along the paths and rails, massive gaps you have to jump and fly across, wizard robots that strengthen other robots including themselves, and hidden switches you have to press before moving on. There are weird differences between the different teams' levels, like the switch placement, but nothing any more drastic than the forest. One thing I did notice though is that Team Dark's signs are different from Team Sonic's in the same spot, and the formation it recommends is harder, which I think is a really cool difference. Immediately after where Team Rose's stage ends, there's an invisible path, and I refuse to recognize that I turned in my first time through, and died here like 3 times, but that's definitely on me for trying to rush it. The Team Chaotix mission here is to collect 10 keys, but they're pretty much along the main path anyway. The only problem is I had to go through the stage 3 times before I realized I never used one of the specific teleport flowers that takes you directly to one of the keys, so it took me around 20 minutes to finish this act as them. Mystic Mansion uses the orb switches for different mystical tricks instead of just flipping the stage upside down. It turns a door in the middle of a room into a hallway, or paintings of robots into real robots, and even just makes robots appear out of nowhere. There are also sections of the stage where it transforms the platforms into different configurations, and you need to decide which one you want to make your way through, or even figure out which one you even can make it through. There are 3 separate cart sections here, and the first one where you can actually take damage is Team Rose. They only have 1 here, but the others continue on to more. There are also a lot of breakable walls in this stage, but they're really obvious, so I don't mind them showing up out of nowhere. This stage also iterates on rail grinding in an interesting way, with paths that will automatically switch which rail you're on, meaning you have to figure out which one you want to ride. You can also just jump between the rails accordingly, which is an interesting way to do it, and I think it's pretty fun. I genuinely couldn't find a single key in this stage as Team Rose, so I didn't get into the special stage my first time around. This was the first stage where I actually had to revisit it to get the Chaos Emerald. I didn't record it because I already had 2 full hours of footage for these 2 stages in boss, but it happened, you can trust me. The end of the stage for Team Sonic and Team Dark has a really interesting section with 3 orbs that take you to a unique challenge for each formation. For Team Sonic, the speed challenge is a chain of homing attacks, flight has you doing some platforming across moving platforms, and power has you gliding across some fans and fighting some of the big robots. My first instinct was to use Team Blast because of how small the platform was. I just didn't want to deal with that, but these 3 challenges all focus on combat for Team Dark. The speed one just has a few pawns, the flight one has a couple wizards, but the power one has a big hammer-swinging robot on an even smaller platform. I didn't want to use the Team Blast in case there were 3 more like in Sonic's section, but that led to me getting knocked off the edge and having to repeat it. Twice. Eventually I just used the Team Blast for that section and I didn't have to worry about it, but putting a huge robot on that tiny platform was terrible. Team Chaotix has to put out 60 torches in this stage, which is way too many. This means you have to use a tornado move at least 60 times, not including any robots with shields. They did have a spider web of rails, which was really cool, but it was also really difficult and annoying because of how the rail switching works. The boss for this stage is another wave-based boss. Team Roses isn't bad, you just kill some robots for a couple minutes. The issue is with Team Sonics and Team Darks. I got a B rank for Team Darks fight, which is pretty average, but it took me over 6 full minutes for a B rank. If you die at all during that entire fight, you have to redo the entire thing. This is way too long for a boss fight. It's so frustrating, there are no checkpoints or anything through the whole fight. Sonics is shorter, but it's still way too long. The Team Chaotix fight took 4 minutes as well, but it was easy because I could basically just spam the Team Blast since the rings give you so much of the meter back. I understand that this is the second to last boss, not including the final story anyway, but this is absurd. The final stage is on Eggman's Air Fleet. This one doesn't really have a gimmick unless you consider the cannons a gimmick, but I don't really think I can, honestly. It's too similar to other obstacles that you just have to avoid. You can destroy the cannons, but regardless, it's just kind of a combination of other things. I like that there isn't much of a new gimmick here, as it's the final stage and it's more of a test of your skill than learning a gimmick. It starts off with rail grinding, but it's very easy to go flying off before you even land for the first time. You can just not touch anything and land is fine, but I didn't know that the first time. There's a lot of destroying cannons to find switches and one specific instance of something that doesn't look destructible but is anyway, but there's a hint right next to it, so it's fine. The Team Rose version of the stage ends right after reaching the first battleship, but Team Sonic and Dark full-on destroy this one and continue on to another. You do pretty much the exact same thing again, like there's so little difference between the two ships, and the level ends. Not perfect, but not terrible. The thing with the helicopter comes back, but this time you're not flying all over the place, so you can actually see what's going on. This is good because it introduces obstacles. It's not hard, and the characters tell you exactly what to do, but it's much better than the forest version. There's also a new enemy type here, a robot with a shield that you can't get rid of, only stun for a moment. If you're attacking it, it holds up its shield, but if you're far away enough, it'll start using a laser attack that leaves it completely vulnerable. It's a fun evolution of the combat as a whole. I like it enough. The Team Chaotix mission is to get through without being seen. It's fine, and then you have to end it with a Team Blast so you don't get detected, but it doesn't really work right. I was very much detected by multiple robots, and it was completely fine. But there was one time that I lost without being seen. It's a little janky. The final act. This is it. And it sucks. What's with Sonic games and terrible final levels? Up to where Team Rose stops, it's fine enough, just some platforming and some fights, nothing too special, but the segment right afterward is where it gets terrible. You hit a self-destruct switch and go flying off to the next part of the level. There's a gold version of the enemy that the previous act introduced, which doesn't get stunned for nearly as long, and simply isn't vulnerable in a laser form, so it's incredibly tedious to stun it, attack it once with the power character, switch back to speed, switch back to power, and so on until it's finally dead. It was nice with the normal one because you could learn to bait the laser attack, but even if you didn't, it only took a couple cycles to take it down. This one takes way too many. Luckily, you actually only need to take out 2 of them, and both times I was able to use the Team Blast, but that's not the half of my problem with this act. There's one of the gold robots on top of a fan, but you can activate the fan without killing it. You ride the fan using the power character, and then immediately have to do a triangle jump. The problem with this is the game doesn't tell you that. The only sign you see is a flight sign, but the flight character can't make it to the next platform. On top of that, there have been other areas that look extremely similar to this that had platforms below to catch you if you fall, so forcing a triangle jump is completely new. There is a way to get here without the fan. It's clearly the faster route that you can only get to if you know what you're doing. Normally I like them, but the only way you can get up here is with a speed character. Despite that, a speed sign is up here where you don't need it. You can't possibly see it if you take the power formation path. Another huge issue is the fact that it expects you to fight so many of the giant robots. I haven't talked about them too much since usually they're a non-issue, but there are just so many here. First you fight one of them on its own, not too bad, but then immediately after you fight one with a helmet. These have shown up before, but again, they're usually not too much of an issue. They're similar to the other ones, but the only way you can do damage to them is by knocking it over after it uses the spin attack and gets dizzy. You can do this to the normal ones too, actually, and all this is fine. They've shown up before, it's not bad. And there are 2 big robots at once, neither with helmets, but still, fine. You fight them, careful to stun them beforehand so you don't get knocked off the platform by one of them attacking while you're focused on the other one. Then there are 3 more. 2 without helmets, 1 with. This is absurd, all on top of the fact that you have to do all this without a single checkpoint. 4 full minutes of extremely difficult gameplay, fight after unfair death, without a single checkpoint. The game then has the audacity to give you a checkpoint less than a minute before the end of the level. The best part? That's just Team Sonic's final act. Team Darks consists of 2 of the new gold robots have to fight at the same time, and replacing the 2 independent big robots with one of the big helmet robots, on top of adding 2 spiked shield robots to both the helmet robots. Granted, if you're on the faster path, you can skip most of the platforming prior, which makes it better in my opinion, but this is not a great final act. The Chaotix mission is just getting 5 keys along the level, but you don't have to go out of your way for any of them or anything, so it's just the same level but halfway between Team Rose and Team Sonic. By the time I played this one though, I had already played it 3 times, so it was a lot less frustrating. The final boss for the main stories is fine, I guess. It's another chase boss called the Egg Emperor. It's essentially a giant mech suit that Eggman is sitting inside of. It starts off with a straight path you have to follow Eggman down, and this is probably the worst part of the fight. If you get too close to him, you take contact damage, but if he gets too far away, he'll charge at you with an entirely unavoidable attack. The speed character is too fast, but it's clearly supposed to be for the speed character specifically, since the next part of the fight is split between flight and power. There are also gaps between platforms, so you need to jump between them. This would be fine if the boss couldn't use projectiles as you're in the air and knock you down unavoidably if you get unlucky. You can't wait out the projectiles before you jump because he'll charge you, and you can't just go around them since you're locked into a trajectory going off of the ramps and going off the flight ring to get to the level up. It's fine, largely, but still annoying. After a little bit, you get to a circular platform that the boss stops on, and you have to stun it with Thunder Shoot before attacking it. There are other things on the platform depending on your team, from as little as just 4 cannons to 4 cannons to do the robots that grab on your characters and a gold robot that comes out of the cannon. Just spamming the Thunder Shoot is by far the best way to get through this, as long as your flight character is at least level 2. Team Dark makes this really easy with Chaos Control, and somehow in my Team Chaotix fight, 2 characters got stuck flying around dealing damage after the Thunder Shoot. Anyway, Team Chaotix beats up the real Eggman, Amy gets her hands on Sonic, and Shadow has another identity crisis. Oh yeah, I haven't really covered the story much. Kinda pointless. Team Chaotix's job has been from Eggman the whole time, trying to get them to free him because Metal Sonic, the thing that's been pretending to be Eggman the whole time, trapped him. Team Rose got Chocola and Froggy from Metal Sonic because Metal Sonic wanted the Chaos data from when Froggy ate an emerald, and because Chao is something Chaos Sonic Adventure 1. Team Dark and Team Sonic were being baited the whole time by Metal Sonic so he could copy their data. You'll learn all this after the Egg Albatross, but the characters don't figure it out until the final story. Since the Egg Albatross fight, though, Metal Sonic has exclusively been trying to take out everyone. This all culminates in the Metal Madness fight, but before the fight, there's a very long cutscene of Metal Sonic transforming, and then Eggman says something about needing the Chaos Emeralds, and all the teams start pulling them out, despite me collecting all but one with Team Rose. Anyway, in the fight, you go through each team and attack it with a formation based on the color of its weak spot. If it's blue, you use power, red is flight, and yellow is speed. I don't know why these are the colors, it's weird and confusing to figure out, but I guess that's a rock, paper, scissors thing. You start as Team Rose to his right. It was exclusively blue for me for some reason, so I just spammed attacks with big. You then switch to Team Chaotix, the color starts changing, and you just attack accordingly. Thundershoot has a really hard time hitting for some reason. I really have no idea why. It works fine as Team Dark. The only problem with Team Dark is that they're at its front. That means if you use a homing attack, you have a chance to go slamming into its jaw and walk it straight into the abyss. It also uses an attack that can freeze a character in place until you attack the ice bubble that they're in so it breaks. It has a terrible hitbox, and it's really annoying to break the bubbles as the flight character if the other two get trapped, but it's not that bad. After doing enough damage, you switch to Supersonic and his 2 golden bubble friends. I don't understand why Tails and Knuckles don't get super forms, it's kinda disappointing, but Metal Overlord has the best song of the game by far, aside from maybe the main theme. I think I'd still give it to What I'm Made Of, actually, it goes so hard. Don't ask why it changed from Metal Madness to Metal Overlord, it sounds cool, okay? The spectacle of this fight is great. Metal Overlord only has a few attacks, a crystal shot that you have to charge through with Rocket XL, a freezing ice missiles that you have to knock down with the Thunder Shoot, and going under the clouds to grab a whole battleship from Eggman's fleet to throw at you, and you have to punch it with Knuckles. There are also a few item balloons with 10 rings each that you grab throughout the fight, since your rings are constantly draining due to the super form. You charge the Team Blast meter every time you successfully block one of the attacks according to the formation, and have to use Team Blast 5 times. It's easy enough, but at one point Metal Overlord gets Chaos Control, and then you just sit there doing nothing for 10 seconds. I don't understand the point of this. It's not fun or interesting, you're just not doing anything for a few seconds. Anyway, you destroy Metal Overlord and the game is over. Everyone's happy, you won with the power of friendship and teamwork, and Eggman is getting beat up by Team Chaotix. Everything is right in the world. Sonic Heroes is one hell of a game. I played it in a way that is by far the least conducive to enjoyment, as I would play through one zone as one team, then switch teams and do the zone as everyone, since it was easier to record that way. It's way more fun if you go through with each team individually all the way through before moving on to the next. It does have the same issue as starting a new story in Sonic Adventure 2, but in this case each team feels like their own game, so it's less of an issue in my opinion. You could play through with one team and be satisfied until you're ready to come back and do another. Adventure 2 made it feel like you only played half a game, because that's exactly what happens. A lot of people complain about playing the same game 4 times, but I feel as though they're all different enough to warrant playing through the same stages, even if different stages would have been preferable. I still really like this game a lot more than Adventure 2 and Unleashed at least, and aside from a few blemishes like a couple annoying Chaotix missions or the final act, this is a great Sonic game, one of my favorites. For reference, Unleashed took me about a week or so just to beat it, because I really didn't want to play it and would take long breaks between every stage, but despite being a similar length, I beat this game in 3 days. All this on top of an amazing soundtrack and characters dripping with personality, even if that personality can get really annoying. This game is an easy 8 out of 10 in my eyes, if only boosted that high by the music and nostalgia. Either way, I love this game, and I definitely can't rate it as low as Sonic Adventure 2, even if there's only a point difference. Actually, in retrospect, maybe I should have said 6 out of 10 for Adventure 2, but I digress. Thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, I love you all. This took not as long as Unleashed, but for me it took more effort. I don't understand how they keep getting longer. I should have been done sooner with Sonic Heroes than Unleashed, but it took longer to make this, and the video was longer, whatever, I don't care. I'm gonna do a smaller game next time, probably something like Sonic R. If it's too short, then I'll add another game, but doing 3 main series, like huge Sonic games in a row, has given me a lot of fatigue, and I just need to chill out with a shorter game this time. My move was postponed for a month, which is really nice, and I was able to get this out. I would still like suggestions on how to do the classics, but I do want to do them soon-ish. Not next, obviously, but eventually. But not like eventually, like soon eventually. You know what I mean? I don't know how to end this.